r/AskReddit. Redditors whose life was changed by a DNA test. What happened? My mom took a DNA test, and she chose the option that allowed her to be connected with family members. She has a half-brother, who was put up for adoption as he was the result of a fling her father had with an old girlfriend. The two were forced to break up because she was heavily religious and teen pregnancy was frowned upon. So she also had to give up the baby. My mother's side of the family never knew about him before last year. My grandfather also managed to keep the secret for 60+ years, which is kind of impressive. He's a pretty cool dude, and he looks and acts almost exactly like my grandfather did. I'm so glad that my mother and him found each other. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to miss out on growing up with one of your siblings. I'm also happy for him for being able to find his biological family. Turns out he lived 20 minutes away from us for his whole life, and we had no idea. We even went to the same family doctor. We also ended up helping him find and contact his mother who gave him up, and everything turned out pretty good. The only downside is, after finding out about the whole thing, his wife got jealous of him spending time with all of his long lost siblings, Beach, and they ended up getting divorced. But he seems happier without her, and he just recently started dating another woman. My dad and his two siblings found out they all have different fathers. One other brother has already passed, so we'll never know if there was a fourth baby daddy or not. My dad is a junior and named his son the third after a man who it turns out is no relation. Our last name is an Irish name and we're 0% Irish as his bio father was likely 100% German. My grandmother was a quiet, devout Catholic woman as far as I always knew. So it's been wild finding out she had some major secrets. My life wasn't changed, but I was contacted by someone on 23andMe wondering how we were connected since he thought he knew all his second cousins in the area. I recognized the surname as that of my biological grandfather. I answered this man's question by detailing how my grandfather had gotten my grandmother pregnant out of wedlock. Then it turned out he was already married with a family, forcing my father to be put up for adoption. I guess the guy didn't like that story and blocked me. I was adopted at birth back in the 1960s. I had a happy childhood, but both of my adoptive parents died of cancer in the early 1990s. I sent my DNA into Ancestry in the hope that I'd make contact with one or both of my birth parents. Literally all I had was my mother's name on the birth certificate and my father's name on a photocopied set of adoption paperwork. When I first checked the result, I was disappointed to find only a few third and fourth cousins. I emailed the ones who looked as if they visited the site regularly. It turned out they were all related to my birth father. He had also died sometime in the early 1990s. Then one day I logged back onto the site and found that I'd matched with a first cousin. I sent a tentative email saying that I'd been given up as a baby and appreciated that it was a sensitive family matter and that if he didn't want to get involved I was fine with that. But could he give me some more information about my family? He replied the next day and told me he was my uncle and that my mother was still alive. She had given birth to me as a teenager, but had reluctantly had to give me up as her family was religious and birth dad was a deadbeat. He sent her a card saying sorry and a £20 note when he heard she'd had me, then married someone else. I made contact with her by email earlier this year. It turns out I have a half brother and sister, as well as nieces and nephews. We are taking things slowly at the moment, but after so many years it's amazing to have a mother again. We have the same likes, dislikes and politics. I'm hoping to meet up with her next year. I ordered one of the earlier versions of 23andMe back in 2013. Looked through some fun generic traits and ancestral history, then forgot about it for a few years. Until one day in 2017 when I received an email that a close relative was discovered. The connection listed them as a first cousin, which was weird because I thought that I had no immediate cousins and no one in my family recognized the name. A few months later, another one was added and finally a third a couple of months after that. Turns out my uncle has multiple illegitimate children and they all took DNA tests around the same time. All three of them found out that he was their dad thanks to my initial result connecting them and working together to compare family history. They're older, 30s to 40s, so it's more of a peace of mind at this point in their lives. But I'm glad that they were able to find their real dad through the experience. My family has been just my mom and I, and our dogs. For a while now, I took one and pretty much got exactly what I expected. My mom took hers and it came back that she wasn't Jewish at all. This was extremely confusing because her father and his family escaped the Nazis. Her father was definitely Jewish. She immediately knew he wasn't her father. It was horrible at first. My mom was devastated, as I'm sure you can imagine. She lost part of her identity. She looked at the part that connects you to people in your family and found someone listed under close relative whom she had never heard of. This person was listed as first cousin for me too. My mom's parents hadn't spoken to her in decades, so there was no asking them. She reached out to the close relative and found out that his parents lived next door to my mom's parents before my mom turned 1. My mom remembered a rumor that one of her cousins told her when she was little. Her mom had an affair with the next door neighbor. Turns out, the next door neighbor was my mom's real father. He has 3 kids around my mom's age, one is 3 months younger than her, and 3 kids about 30 years younger. As you can see, he got around LOL. He passed away a few years back, but the family welcomed us with open arms. When we met them, it was an instant connection, like we had been a part of their lives forever. They brought out pictures, and boy does my mom look like her father. They told me that my grandpa would be so proud of me and my accomplishments. Some of our interests and talents aligned. They told us we looked like the rest of the family, and we did. We never had that before. My mom and I went from only having each other to her having 6 siblings, having nieces and nephews, and me having aunts and uncles and tons of cousins and a family reunion to go to each summer. I have family in 5 different states, little cousins to teach, and big cousins to look up to. My mom has a huge family, and so many people to call and talk to and to ask her how she's doing. It's amazing to watch. Weddings, birthday parties, and lots of love. Funerals too. One of my uncles passed away, but I got a chance to meet him before he did. I think he was waiting to meet my mom and me. He was an amazing person, and even though I didn't know him for long, I loved him. My family has turned this into the best experience of my life, and my mom's too. Edit. Spacing. Edit 2. OMG, I went to sleep and did not expect this to blow up like it did. Thank you, kind Redditor, for gold, and thank you so much for all of your kind words. We are so happy to answer some questions. We took the test in 2017. My mom grew up with toxic abusive parents, and they cut her off at 19. Judaism can be tested for because we are an ethnic group with certain genetic markers. My friend did a test to see what her ancestry is recently. She ended up discovering who her dad actually is and learning that her dad is still alive, not dead like her mother said, so that's something. This is not exactly the type of DNA test people would expect, but I've suffered from pretty awful mental health issues since I was a child. Eating disorders, general social anxiety, OCD, depression, and as of a few years ago, psychosis. By the time I was 16, I had been on well over a dozen different mental health medications with little to no help and a lot of side effects. My mom's schizophrenia kicked in when I was 2 years old. She had it under control for a while, but as I grew up, I basically watched it take over her. Started with little things like putting the TV remote inside the fridge. Next, I was having to put out fires and clean up her burn wounds because she'd try to cook directly on the stovetop, no pot pan, and eventually led to me having to lock myself in a room because the voices had told her she had to kill me. So when I turned 18 and started showing very mild signs of psychosis symptoms myself, my doctor was very diligent in getting it under control as fast as possible. Treatment was extensive, but part of getting better involved going through a clinical trial for my condition that involved having my DNA tested. I don't know exactly how it works, but they used my DNA to find out what medication would be the perfect fit for me to help with my mental health without having to deal with negative side effects. I still suffer from mental health, but more so anxiety symptoms than anything else, and have graduated from the psychosis intervention program I was in since my symptoms are almost entirely gone in that department. For a long time, one of my biggest fears was that my son would grow up like I did, watching my mom's sickness take control. But now I truly feel as if I am the one that is in control, and it's a great feeling. My life wasn't changed, but it was made a little more complete. Found out, along with my dad, when I was a teenager, that my grandpa wasn't my real grandpa. My grandma, who survived her husband back in early 90s, told us late in her life in the mid 2000s that her husband was sterile, so she slept with this other guy. Let's call him Tom Thompson. My dad had no idea and was in his late 40s when this news came to us. For 5 years off and on I searched all public records to find any trace of this Tom Thompson and found nothing. My grandma was going senile, so although I believe she had an affair, I didn't believe all the info she spewed out about Tom being a war pilot and having done amazing adventures. Did my DNA test just for the hell of it last year and found out that Tom Thompson does exist, and he was a war pilot and everything else she said about him checked out. I'm now connected to my cousins on my dad's side, and it's been really warming to get closer to a family I never knew. I was adopted and received a connection to my birth mother's brother through ancestry.com. I was hesitant to reach out because of all the reunion horror stories I've heard throughout my life, but I ended up doing it anyway. My uncle asked me to call him right away, and now I have 3 siblings who want me in their life. Aunts, uncles and gajillion cousins who threw a big welcome home party for me this summer. My birth mom's cousin told me she had been looking for me, but didn't know how to go about it because of her age and lack of ability to use the internet. However, she never told her children I existed. I guess something that generation just didn't do. But anyway, happy story. I had a very rare cancer as a child. I was always worried that any children I might have would suffer the same fate. When my wife and I got serious about parenthood, I learned that there was a genetic test for the type of cancer I had. I submitted a sample and it came back completely negative for any cancer markers, meaning my kids would have essentially no chance of developing the same disease. This was a huge relief, but at the same time it meant that my cancer was completely spontaneous, which changed an incredibly rare cancer into an almost impossible cancer. This profoundly illustrated just how little control we humans have over our fate. My entire life I was told I was heavily Native American. So much so, in fact, my granddad was a Cherokee chief and he gave all of his grandkids Native American names. I have 0% Native American and I'm mostly Irish and Scandinavian. I dunno man. My 23andMe also showed up no native, but my grandmother on dad's side is literally half. Blood tested and reservation registered. It's pretty wild. We are all related by blood too. I also showed up Portuguese and no one else in my family did, but still enough DNA to say yeah, he's your dad, he's your brother, she's your mom, etc. I bought my ex-husband and I 23andMe kits for Christmas one year. I am part black. That was a shocker. I don't claim it or anything though. I'm Snow White. He was adopted. All he knew from the adoption agency was that his mother was married at the time he was conceived, but her husband was not his father. My husband was the product of an affair. It was really neat when his results came back and he saw profiles of 3rd and 4th cousins. First time in his life he ever saw a picture of his blood relatives. One day he got a new match from someone. It said he was likely her uncle. As it turns out, it was his half-sister. As it turns out, his mother had 4 kids with 4 different baby daddies. He had 2 older siblings and one that is 10 years younger than him. His mother kept his other siblings but for whatever reason, put him up for adoption. Also, as it turns out, his mother is crazy as a bedbug. He eventually had to block her from calling because she was nuts. His adoptive family wasn't very good. There was some abuse, but his bio siblings have all told him they think he was the lucky one for having been adopted. I had been searching for my biological father for 10 years. When I took my DNA test and got the results back, I found out A, my bio father was 14 when I was born. B, my mom was 20 when I was born. C, my father died when he was 24. D, he was murdered by his best friend. E, that there was a Lifetime original TV series with an episode dedicated to his murder. F, that I had a half-brother. G, my half-brother didn't know the person he called dad his whole life wasn't his dad. Q, existential crisis. Growing up I had 2 half-brothers and 3 half-sisters from my parents' previous marriages. I was told that my father's wife had cheated on him with another woman and he caught her and that was the end of that. And my mom told me that he had caught her husband with another woman and so they divorced. They got married and had me. Hence I was the only child they had together. The sister closest to me in age, she is 6 years older than me, got a DNA test done and lo and behold, She is my full sister. We had asked my father numerous times after my mother died if she was my full sister and he denied it till his dying day. She didn't get the test done until after he passed away, so my parents were having an affair for at least 6 years. It really hasn't changed my life though. I only have a relationship with my one brother and that's just fine with me. My brother and I did 23andMe tests and when we went to compare our results it said he was only my half brother. We thought we were full blood related our whole lives. Turns out, our biological mom, who has since abandoned us and passed away, cheated on my dad and made him believe the baby was his. My dad was 20 at the time and it's changed the whole course of his life. He loves my brother as his own but damn. Didn't do DNA, but just the regular ancestry family tree. My family is very Norwegian and tends to be very proud of this. Nobody had ever really done a comprehensive family tree before, since patronymics make that difficult. But I spent months matching records and going back as far as I could, before losing the trail sometime in the early 1700s. When Grandpa asked how my project was going at Thanksgiving, I asked him if he'd known his great-grandfather was Swedish. He was still complaining about it at Christmas. This revelation shattered his world for a little while. Apparently I have no Native American like I was told growing up. I'm 98% British Irish, and there's 0.1% of Ashkenazi Jew. The biggest life change came from the realization that I had extra Neanderthal DNA, which gives me the superhuman ability to sneeze less after eating dark chocolate. Edit. I can't believe this sparked so much discussion. I revisited my 23andMe to see how my Neanderthal DNA ranks compared to some others. I have 280 variants, which is more than 58% of other folks. So does anyone out there with more variants really have less back hair? Edit 2. Pack it up people, this guy has more Neanderthal DNA than 99% of the population. I have 348 Neanderthal variants, more than 99% of the people who've done 23andMe. Proof, img.com link. My husband has done 5 DNA tests to trace his ancestry and all have come back that they were unable to get results. Aliens? Not my ancestry, but my partner found out their great-grandfather did not die in war like everyone believed. Turns out he started a new family across the ocean and abandoned his home life. Not quite life-changing, but I've never known my father. He spilt from my mother before I was born and I never saw him. All my life my mother and family said he was Thai. I'm mixed race. Recently I took a DNA test and the result said I am 0% Thai. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.